Welcome back. We continue with the Sudan conflict as foreign countries continue efforts to evacuate their citizens and diplomatic staff from Sudan. Kenya says it has evacuated 39 Kenyan, Somali and Saudi students from the war-torn country. The Cabinet Secretary for the Ministry of Defense, Aden Duale, greeted the students on the tarmac and said Kenya would do as many trips as possible to evacuate Kenyans and nationals from other countries. The students who attended the International University of Africa in Khartoum described their ordeal as sad. They were positive that help would come.
All the evacuees are students from the International University of Africa based in Khartoum, the Sudan. 39 in total, as I said earlier, 19 Kenyans, and 20 from our allied states and friends.
Most of the time we were sleeping, as in lying down on the floor, just praying and keeping positive. And I strongly had the feeling that I had to keep positive, very focused, and above all, to take any risk to get me out of that country.
Well, African Affairs Analyst Ibrahim Anoba joins me now from California, United States. Hello, Ibrahim. Glad to have you today.
I'm okay.
So it's been 2 weeks of continuous fighting in Sudan. Even with the ceasefire negotiations, foreign countries have begun evacuating their citizens. What do you make of this whole situation?
Well, I think it's really unfortunate. Remember, in 2019, the people of Sudan went into the streets to demand for change, and they were successful in toppling the dictator Omar al-Bashir, only for the army led by Burhan and Dagalo, the two individuals at loggerheads right now, to take power and throw out the prime minister in 2021, who was supposed to help them lead a transition from military to civilian rule. So to see that the hard work of Sudanese, for many who sacrifice their lives, and for many who spend their time and resources who are not Sudanese to help achieve that change in government in 2019. And to see everything crumble right now, it's really unfortunate, disheartening, and you can only wish it never happened.
The 72-hour truce is the fourth attempt in efforts to stop the fighting. They've all failed. What's the possibility that this rage could end anytime soon?
Let's face the reality. These are two individuals who will stop at nothing to get power. Remember, the RSF, controlled by Emeti or Dagalo, as it's formerly known, is an extension of the army. And both the RSF and the army played critical roles in the Darfur crisis. The former president al-Bashir had been convicted of humanitarian crimes and, to some extent, perpetrating genocide in Darfur. But both Dagalo and Burhan were two key players in that episode in Darfur, who started in 2003. And they both successfully throughout al-Bashir in 2019, in 2021, throughout the prime minister. And I think of this one as the last dance between the two key powers. And it will be really myopic to think that any international calls for the stop of hostilities or sort of sanctions will bring these two individuals to the negotiating table anytime soon. Unfortunately, this may go on for a while, and it may take some heavy economic sanctions or blockade to prevent both individuals from exporting gold or whatnot that could force them to the negotiating table.
There have been, different postulations about, the consequences of this conflict if it's not stopped. So what are your biggest concerns, especially with the failure of the ceasefire agreements?
So my biggest concern, of course, is the humanitarian crisis. Sudan was already in dire conditions before COVID. And after COVID, things didn't really change, and we did not achieve great changes during the transition period. And now this crisis. So the primary concern is humanitarian. There are dire conditions in IDP camps, which are now plunged into much more disaster. So apart from the humanitarian crisis, it's also about stability in the region. Remember, Sudan is the window, one of Africa's window to the Red Sea and to the Middle East generally. And if you consider the economic and military interest at play here, then you begin to worry. First, because you've seen the Wagner Group, which is, of course, an extension of the Russian government, according to findings by CNN and the Washington Post, that the Wagner Group have been, clandestinely exporting or smuggling gold out of Sudan to fund Russia's military campaign in Ukraine. You also see China's interest in Djibouti, which is just a neighbor to Sudan, and of course the proposed military base in Sudan by Russia. So you look at this military interest, and you look at the economic value of Sudan, and you look at the fact that it's an access to the Nile River. Many of these factors, you put them into consideration, you see that things may not calm down soon, not because the locals or the Sudanese are not willing to have peace, but because international players have greater interest in having a continued war in Sudan to their own benefit.
These international players, are the ones also, such as the United Nations, have called for both parties to come to the negotiating table. But it appears, there's some sort of power tussle that we're seeing here.
I mean, it does. I honestly do not see too many stuff that the United Nations can help, too many peace resolution that the UN can broker here, because the UN has been active in Sudan for a long time, and the most it can do is to sanction individuals or give relief material. I think the actual realistic peaceful resolution could be brokered by the African Union, and the reason why I say this is because you look at both of these generals; they have greater affiliations across not only the Maghreb or Northern Africa region, but also into the Sub-Saharan Africa region. And if you can have the AU tell these two generals that whenever cease power, they will not be welcome into the African Union, that no African country will trade with them, that no African leader will welcome them as brothers, then they may have to think it twice, because, what do you gain by exclusively affiliating yourself with China or Russia as a president or as a general in Sudan, and you do not have the support of your primary trade partners, which are your African neighbors. So I think the African Union can play the economic leverage here, but also key powers like the US. We've seen the US broker this 72-hour ceasefire, and there is already a plan ongoing to extend this ceasefire into a permanent, much more stable seizure of hostilities. It's yet to be seen how that's going to play out, but unfortunately, I do not think this hostility will end anytime soon, just because of the massive international interest going on here.
So, Ibrahim, since the 2021 coup that ushered in the two military generals at the center, of this dispute, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his deputy General Hamdan Mohamed Dagalo, that's Hamdi. Do you see the conflict evolving from a relatively straightforward power struggle to a more complex war or a full-blown war?
Sudan has been really unfortunate since independence in 1956 to have this kind of power tussle snowballing into civil wars. And you look at its history, and you look at the current dynamics ongoing here, you will hardly conclude that there won't be any extension of this into a full-blown civil war. But again, as I said, it's not because Sudanese want to go into war with one another. It's just because, one, you have two individuals who are so selfish and who see this fight against one another as the ultimate prize to becoming the leader of Sudan, but also because you have these international players who would have their own interests in this war. So again, I do not see this ending soon, and I think there is less that the Sudanese people could do at this point. I mean, you look at the RSF. This is a militia group that consists of over 100,000 infantrymen. You look at the army; they have tremendous air power, and they've been striking civilian holdings or civilian areas, claiming that the RSF are hiding under civilian tents. So you have these two parties with military support plunging in from Russia and China, and they'll stop at nothing to keep fighting each other and to see who will budge. And I don't think either of them will budge anytime soon. It's just unfortunate that this is what the Sudanese people will have to go through yet again after 2019 and 2021.
So how confident are you, Ibrahim, that parties to this conflict will respect the terms of the latest ceasefire?
I mean, I don't think they will. I mean, you've seen the last few days how this 72-hour ceasefires have been kind of not sufficiently adhered to. There have been, reports that while the U.S. Marines or SEAL team were airlifting Americans out of Sudan, Khartoum, there were gunshots still in the streets. And so, I mean, you look at the individual who brought these two men into power in the first place, Omar al-Bashir. This is a person that doesn't really respect ceasefire. Burhan never respected ceasefires. And also the RSF, very notorious for going against normal war conventions, as we can point to in the case of Darfur. So I do not have any trust with these two generals and their respective army. And it's just so unfortunate that this is the reality. And if you look at how countries like the US, UK, Canada, Germany pulling out, it tells you that they can see this situation easily degenerating into chaos.
Right, Ibrahim, thank you so much for your time on the program and for bringing us more perspective on the situation in Sudan.
Sure.